You can forget a lot of things, Foster Care Nation, but never forget this. You're listening to Unparalleled Studios.
I signal.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
Strength for the powerless, courage for the fearful, hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason
and Amanda.
And today we have Lily Cory with us. Lily has a very unique story, as all of our stories tend to be as we come out of this whole foster care, adoption, lifestyle, the things that happen. And today we wanted to talk with Lily because she's working with a nonprofit organization called the Mockingbird Society as a youth advocate, working through the things that we really need to be paying attention to what we're doing within our lives and putting some real experience and help out in the world after she's had her own very difficult beginning. Lily, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you all doing?
Oh, we're great. Thank you for coming today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had to overcome some scheduling conflicts before, so I appreciate you being flexible and allowing us to deal with everything we had to work through here. But tell us, how did you get involved in the foster care adoption world? What was your story like? How did it begin?
Oh, goodness. So I have been in and out of care since the age of 5. I was born in Hawaii, on the Big Island, and my journey began in foster care when I came home from my kindergarten orientation, and we got a knock on the door, and my younger brother and I were removed. And that, I think there were a lot of factors that led to our removal, but the thing that really kind of solidified us staying in the system was when I was 11, we got placed into relative care. So at this point, we had moved from Hawaii to Washington State, which is where I currently reside. And we were placed with my aunt, and there was a lot of complicating factors that then led to my adoption. My brother and we got adopted by my aunt. And, things were not super easy after the adoption, but I knew that for me, having gone through that experience that I went through, I really wanted to make an impact in the lives of other young people, like the way that the like ones who really cared made an impact on me. And so I went on this long career path journey of like volunteering, working in my community, and eventually going to college where I studied human services. I went to Western Washington University. And I did like a bunch of internships working in CPS, working in what we call behavioral rehabilitative services. So like working with young people who have like particularly unique trauma experience. And then I decided that system felt really broken, like just like the constant having to remove young people and not really feeling like there's a lot of change. So I got really motivated to think more about like, how do we actually change the system? And I went to grad school. I went to the University of Washington. I got into the Master's of Social Work program there, and they have a specific policy track for policy and administration. And so I followed that track, and I got linked up with my first year there. I got linked up with the Mockingbird Society, which is the nonprofit that I currently sit on. I'm a board member of. And I was kind of blown away about the way how they decided to do this work. Like throughout my experience in care, and then also being like a caseworker, there were so many things that you had to just do that it was really difficult to spend time to really center the young people. But that was like kind of just like a given in the way that they operated at the Mockingbird. So I got to see young people originating ideas about how to make the system better. And then I got to see how, the people who work at the Mockingbird Society take that, those ideas and alongside with young people, and they advocate with legislators, and they get it done. And that year in particular, like we extended foster care, and we expanded like college access, which is incredible to think about. So yeah, and then since then I've just been plugging along doing various systems work and policy work. And that's kind of been the career track that I'm on right now. But that's how I kind of have been involved in it. Honestly, it's like kind of an understatement to say that this has kind of been my like life's work, because it's really true. Like I've been involved in one way or another in like foster care related things since I was 5. So yeah, that's a very long story, but that's kind of how I'm here today.
You started in the foster system as a kid, and then you experienced adoption and ended up in educated and working in the system with caseworkers and moving on up to policy and working with kids. Like, is there a part of this that you haven't touched yet, or are you just like an actual expert on all of it?
That's actually funny, because I don't consider myself an expert at all. I think it's like because like I work with like young people who are so innovative and so much smarter than me. Like I don't consider myself an expert. But no, like I guess like it's true. Like I've even I did the the foster youth internship in DC. So I've also, I worked in a Senate at the time. It was Senator Patty Murray's education office doing national work around young people's impact in system on like the national level. And that, so I guess, yeah, I've worked in it all. I mean, the only thing I think I haven't done yet is foster and be a foster parent, but that's like the next step, right? But like currently I'm a CASA. I work as a child advocate too in the local court system that I'm currently I live in my community. And so, yeah, I mean, I really am about this, and I really, really want to see difference being made for young people, because it's so important. Mm-hmm.
It is very important. Can you just kind of explain for our listeners what a CASA is?
Yeah, so it's a court-appointed special advocate. There's a larger program, but specifically in Washington State, it's the Washington State Child Advocacy Court Advocacy Programs. And so where I reside, I'm a guardian ad litem. I'm specifically assigned by the court to work alongside the social worker to make sure that the young person and the family that we are working with get their needs met and are actually being heard, what their wants and what their goals are. So it's actually a pretty empowering place to be in, because I'm not in a space where I'm like mandated to do X, Y, and Z. Like my real job is just to like really hear the family and hear the kids. And I've been working with some really incredible young people. I like to say that like I specialize in adolescents. Like I love teenagers. And so that's kind of like the group that I usually gravitate towards and I end up working with, because I just think they have so much creativity, and they are, the future in so many ways. And they have so many ideas that I think society often ignores. So it's really a pleasure and a privilege to be working with them.
Yeah, thank God that there are people out there wired to work with teenagers, because, as you can see with who's hanging out with us today, that's my wheelhouse, is give me a little one. That's what I'm wired for. Amanda might suggest, and I'll say it ahead of time before she has to, that there's a good reason why my mind works really well with little ones. It might have something to do with the way that I'm wired. I might be a 4-year-old at heart. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are afraid to work with teens, because teens can be challenging, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no doubt about it. Teens have their own level of challenge that they bring to the table, and not everybody is prepared to deal with that. So, at least if you have a newborn baby or a 3-year-old that was maybe born addicted or something like that, they come with their own set of challenges for sure.
Yeah.
But they tend not to be quite as severe of challenges oftentimes as what teenagers bring, right?
Yeah.
I've never had a 4-year-old that have a baby, but I've seen teenagers try.
Yeah, I think, the thing that I have to constantly remind myself is that I mean, and that's one of the unique things is like I'm not in a position of power over the young people that I work with. And that I think really helps frame the conversation. I think for me, I usually just like don't go in with an agenda, and I'm really open to hearing what they have to say. And I also kind of meet them where they're at. Like, yeah, the system sucks. Like it really does. And so, and oftentimes they're in this place where like people around them aren't saying that or aren't affirming that for them. And so it always surprises me when I like go and I sit with a young person and, and they're talking about this and I'm like, yes, you are allowed to be upset. Like, yes, you are allowed to feel the injustice that you're experiencing. Because I think a lot of people around them are trying really hard to get them in like a different place. But I think sometimes we just need to slow down and acknowledge the pain that comes with like what's happening.
Hey there, Foster Care Nation. We wanted to open up a dialogue and talk with some of the listeners a little bit and just see what you guys have to say. We have a voicemail line. It is at 413-FOSTER-3. That's 413-367-8373. Now, we would love to be able to share some of your stories. If you have a couple quick stories you want to put on the air, or if it's something you'd just like to talk to us a little bit and let us know what you're hearing and what you would like to hear, that would be awesome. We would love to have that from you guys. So if you would reach out and let us know. Also, I'm going to just assume that you guys know that we are talking about putting some of these stories on the air. So if there's some privacy issues, feel free to change a name. Don't use a name. I don't care. Just take care of the privacy stuff. We don't want anybody getting in any trouble on anything like that. We're not trying to out anybody's story out here in the world. So just be mindful of privacy. Again, that is the phone number is 413-FOSTER-3, 413-367-8373. Thanks a lot, and we hope to hear from you soon.
And I think that that's a really great relationship builder. And that's always been like an access point for me, is the empathy that I carry with their experience.
Well, yeah, because you came through the child welfare system yourself, and you had your own level of trauma that ended up putting you, because I don't know your personal story that deeply, but I'm just going to guess that most people could work on the assumption that the average kid who ends up in the foster care system, there's a good chance they've seen some level of trauma, that's not helped them grow and become that well-regulated adult that we think we should all become so easily, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, I'm in a little bit of a unique situation just because like my trauma was like, it was externalized, but it was also really internalized for me. I think, my parents, they really did try. I think that they had their own historical trauma that they were also battling as well, that never got really addressed. And now that I'm like, older, I have that hindsight, but in the moment I was like, what the heck? Why aren't you guys getting your stuff together to like get us back and stuff? Like, why can't you, love us enough to get your stuff together? And that was a narrative that I really like told myself. But now that I'm older, I think and with a lot of therapy, I've come to have a little bit more empathy around, what they were having to go through while, my brother and I were not with them. And so, for context, they spent years battling addiction, and, domestic violence, and we were, severely impoverished. We were constantly homeless, a lot of memories around that. And so, as a kid, I think I was pretty flexible. Like I didn't have the realization in the moment that anything was wrong because this just felt like it was my normal experience. Right. But then there were some things that would come up like, maybe it's not normal that when the police are called, my first response is to go and to tell them to say it's okay. Like they're just having a bad day. Right. Like that was the caretaker fixer in me as a kid that that now in hindsight I realize like really plays to like how I respond to other people. So that's how I feel like trauma has manifested for me, is like I'm having to really undo a lot of the coping skills that I built when I was younger that don't really serve me anymore. And also I think that this term, like well-adjusted adult is like complicated, because there are days where I'm like, am I a well-adjusted adult? But a lot of, and that was one of the things that I realized that really helped me get there, is that it's okay to let other people in and let other people help you.
Yeah, I think the only time I feel like a well-adjusted adult is when I leave the chiropractor.
Right. Right. Yeah. And I think that that's like the battle that I'll always have to face, right? Like, I think that there are just going to be things that come up that's like, oh, that's because I grew up the way I did. There's nothing wrong with me as the person. It's just that this is like now something I have to deal with. And that's really helped me reframe like my everyday experience of the world. So
I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, and at the very beginning, you were talking about in your early childhood and the stuff that you dealt with, and you mentioned the ones who really cared.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the people in your life that really cared, the ones that did make that difference for you?
Yeah, totally. So for me, it's a compilation of people. Like, when I was a kid, I had teachers that I absolutely adored, who really saw me. I think about my kindergarten teacher, Mrs. Hurd. She was the best. I mean, and I was fortunate enough that even though we moved a lot, I always ended up at like one elementary school that was kind of like locally covered a large area, just because we're like where we lived. Like, Hawaii is actually pretty rural. And so there was like one school that covered an area. And, up until I left the island, she would let me come into her classroom and read with, her kids. And even though she like kind of knew what was going on in my life, and that it wasn't like, perfect in any way, shape, or form, she provided me with like a constant space where I could really shine. And she really, really believed in me. So a lot of love to her. And then as I got older, we moved to Washington. So I had to basically re-meet everybody in my life. I would definitely say my long-term social worker, Corey Hayes, she really cared. Like, I think that she was kind of fighting an impossible situation with my family, but she really sat me aside and kind of said, like, you obviously don't like what's happening, and you have the power to not have this kind of life later on. Like, you're going to have a time in your life where you're going to have a choice about what kind of life you want, and you have the power to not want this, right? And so she really just kind of bestowed in me like a future. Like, I didn't really know that I had a future, right? Because I think when you're living in the stress of everyday trauma, you don't really get to see beyond the next day. And so she really kind of opened me up to this idea of having a future. And then my adoptive mom, we have a really complicated relationship. She actually passed a year ago. So still really reeling from that, but she was definitely supportive in a lot of ways, and also not supportive in many ways as well. But then also I would have to say, like, my friends in high school, their parents were extraordinarily supportive. Like, my friends and their families would always open their home to me. I cannot, like, one of my best friends from high school, she sat with me for hours trying to figure out calculus, because I was like, if I don't get this, I'm not going to be able to graduate, and so she like, she, and it's like the little things like that like the little people along the way who like were my cheerleaders, who really get to share in that success that I get to sit in today. Because without all of those little pieces, like, you don't think that like studying calculus means anything, but it like really did help me graduate. And I didn't like, what would have happened if I didn't graduate? I keep thinking about that. What wouldn't have happened if I didn't do this? What would have happened? And so those people get to share, I think, a lot in my success as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how we, even as people who are perhaps not foster parents or don't have a specific role in the system, you still have a lot of ability to change a lot of things and create a lot of differences in lives. And, a great example would be a couple of our kids now have dealt with teachers who, one specific kid who's got his own set of challenges. I remember one particular teacher. I used to work with a guy a long time ago in a totally different job, and I met his wife, who then went on to become a teacher, and with a last name like Führer. Like when the kid comes home, that's his teacher's name. I'm like, I know that name. I know that name. And then I found out his teacher's first name, and I'm like, yeah, I used to work with her husband. I met her. I know this woman. And she was an amazing teacher and went above and beyond to really try and help him through a lot of his own struggles. Now, we've also had a couple other teachers. There's one of our children right now has a particular teacher who, though the school claims to be a very trauma-informed school, I will question what the definition for some of those people is for trauma-informed, because we've had to have a couple really serious conversations about like these are the things that this kid deals with, and it's not his fault. And what you're seeing is it's not bad behavior. What you're seeing is a kid who's dealing with some coping mechanisms that were built in a very hard place in his very young life, and this is not his fault. This is not it's not all these other things you're assuming it is. It's trauma responses, and we want you to understand that. And that's been a very difficult journey with one particular teacher, just because of the way she's handled it. I don't think she perhaps understands the amount of impact she has on a young kid's life.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. Like, I see this a lot, and I think, for me, the difference was I was never a quote unquote problem kid. Like, my behavior never manifested in a way that was distracting or like disruptive to class. Like, if anything, I was really appeasing to like my teachers and whatnot. But I definitely see this like with the young people I work with directly. Like, they will often be like labeled like the problem child, and then therefore like the teacher doesn't want to engage anymore with them, right? Because in a lot of ways, like that's their response to kind of the secondary trauma that they're experiencing working with that kid, right? And so I think it's hard, because sometimes I think teachers don't realize that they are actually human service providers as well. And I think we put so much on teachers that, to have a truly trauma-informed school, I also think about like, where is that social emotional support that also helps the teacher, as well as like, where is that social emotional training that we're giving our teachers? Like, where is that self-care that we're supporting our teachers with, right? Because teachers already have so much on their plates. So I definitely see both sides, but I'm also just like, no child is a lost cause, in my opinion. And I think we need to really, really act that value out, especially if you're in a human service serving profession.
Absolutely. And some people, sometimes they just have a bad day, and I get that.
Yeah,
I get that.
Totally.
But sometimes with kids who've been in hard places, who've had hard things to deal with, that's a big deal for those kids to have to be put in a position. There's a little one who's not happy. But it's really difficult for kids who've been put in that position by adults who are having their own hard time, their own bad moment. And it's really challenging sometimes. And as foster parents or adoptive parents, I think part of our job is to be willing to stand and support that kid primarily in that. I try not to be the big, loud, scary, loud voiced guy who walks into school and makes a big stink about something like that, because it's rarely helpful to do that. But I will also say that sometimes a kid needs to see that they are not only supported but protected in the moments where someone else's bad moment makes them feel unsafe.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So that's been a challenge that we've had to deal with a couple kids out, honestly, because not every school that is quote unquote trauma informed is informed properly.
Yeah.
Or it may just be, I know some of my older kids that they went to school, and there was one particular teacher in the school, and they're like, Dad, I don't know how they let her teach science. Like, she's teaching science from 1920 something, because that's when she was in college, because she's like that old. I think she just retired a year or two ago. But this particular teacher was teaching some pretty outdated stuff. And but think about it. If she was, her formative years were in the 20s or 30s or whatever, I forget what it was. But, half a decade ago or half a century ago, like, if that's where she came from, I mean, God love her for teaching for so long, but so much changes in our knowledge, not just in the science principles we're teaching, because I'm going to tell you, I've looked at like the science stuff about how an atom works and what they're teaching kids now. And I'm like, that's not at all what I learned. But, there's plenty of things there that change, but human psychology and the way that we view things like trauma and difficult things that have happened to kids at young ages and how that affects their brains and what we can do to create a space where these kids can grow and learn and heal. That's changed so much over the last 20 years, let alone the last 50.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teachers who maybe haven't gotten that some of those things brought into their perspective very, very well. And so, where you're right, the teaching profession, I don't want to sound like I'm just being, judgmental on all teachers here, because I'm definitely not. I'm not a teacher for a reason, because this guy right here, I would not last very long in a classroom, because I don't abide silly BS very well. And I was in middle school. I was a middle schooler, and we may have had some of that in our heart and soul at that age. So I'm not mad at all teachers, but there are some places where I think it's as a foster parent or an adoptive parent or just a parent in general, it's our job to go out and protect our kids in a place where maybe they're messing up. The school or a teacher or a principal or somebody in their life is messing up, and it's our job to go out and be an advocate for those kids.
Yeah. And I'm definitely like saying something. I mean, I'm in a privileged position now where I get to like work with professionals I train a lot of professionals around like LGBTQ plus related topics, and working with like, how do you as a direct service provider, like handle, unjust systems towards these kids. And often I have to have the uncomfortable conversation of like, you may be out here looking for resources, but I think you're the resource, right? Like you're here, you're taking this training, you care. And so now that you care, you actually have to start applying, those values and start calling out injustice when you see it, right? Because that actually really resonates with young people. Like they're going to look at that. They're going to say, oh my gosh, this person actually cares because they're saying the one thing that no one else will say. And it's not always pretty, right? Because for at least a lot of people I work with, they work in really rural environments, which rural communities really do care about the young people that are in their community. But I think sometimes they just don't have the information or the knowledge around what it means to support an LGBTQ plus young person or what it even means to be LGBTQ plus. So often I feel like the people who I train then have to go out and like talk to those people more intentionally. And it can be really hard because that young person is caught in the middle, right, of people not knowing things. And that's not fair to the young person because they didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. Right.
We live in one of those rural areas. And I will say that, for sure, that's not something that's we're in the middle of Missouri. So draw an X and across the United States, and we're slightly to the left of the center of that X. We're out here in what people would call the flyover country, and there are plenty of people who still have different ideas about all of that. And quite frankly, there was an old radio show that I used to listen to many years ago, and I love what the guy said because his whole take on it, and he was a right wing political type guy. And it's not what you would necessarily expect from him, but the way he viewed it was He said, I don't personally really care how you choose to titillate your orifices. And I went, yeah, that's it, right? Like you do your thing. I'm not mad at you how you do your thing. It's probably not exactly quite the same as everybody else in your life. And that's part of the beauty of this world, is that we can just get along. We can accept one another, and we can try and help one another. We can support one another. We can do all kinds of amazing things. And I don't really have to care about what it is that you feel on certain topics. You may be a Democrat, and I don't have to hate you, or a Republican, and I don't have to hate you. Even if you're independent, I still don't have to hate you. We could actually just create a place where we could all get along and support one another, regardless of our personal choices.
Yeah. And I always say the health, safety, and wellness of children is not a political debate. Like, it should not be a political debate. Like, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about supporting young people who are queer or in the LGBTQ plus community. It's like, we're talking about their health, safety, and wellness, right?
Yeah.
And part of that is knowing that if they are, out here, that they're not going to be harmed. And I do mean that from a standpoint of like systems harming them, but also from a standpoint of like, them ending up homeless, them, potentially having suicidal ideation or behavior, and then also like other people inflicting violence on them. Like, that's what I mean. Like, that shouldn't be.
Absolutely.
We should not be doing that.
Right.
That's a baseline. And I think a lot of people would agree with me. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Our oldest daughter identified as a lesbian, and quite frankly, I had to learn a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was raised in this community. I was raised, more than 20 years ago. We'll say I'm getting old. More than 20 years ago, I was raised in a rural community where that was not something that you would openly say in that time and place.
Yeah, totally.
And we've had to learn how to change our reaction to these things, and how we talk about it and all that. There's a whole lot of stuff there that we have to realize that if you take just your average kid who's dealing with that, that's a lot. Now you take that kid and you pull them out of their home, you pull them out of the things that they know, and you pull them into the foster system because maybe they're in a situation where they are in physical danger, and so they have to be pulled out of that. They have those additional traumas from before they were pulled out of a biological setting, and now they have the traumas from being pulled out, because even if it's the safest thing for them, it doesn't mean that it's not going to cause more levels of trauma. And we're neck deep in this stuff at that point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And like, I think for me, like my situation is, like I said, I think a lot of the trauma I faced was really internal, because I did a very good job of hiding. So like for me, like I identify now as like a bisexual woman, with still always questioning my gender, because, what is gender, right? But I think the thing that I had when I was young, when I knew that I was something, like I didn't know exactly what it was, right? And my bio parents were actually pretty chill about all of that stuff. Like they really, like, even though there were a lot of complications at home, like they were always like, we love you no matter what. Like that was the rhetoric I always grew up with from them. And there was a lot of like really free hippie, like to explore yourself, like that's fine. And then I ended up with my adoptive mom, who was conservative, evangelical. And the challenging thing was like, I knew that if I were to come out, like it would not be in any way, shape, or form like accepted. But also, I really fell in love with my church community. I found a lot of like community that really encouraged me. I found a spirituality that I didn't know that I needed. And then I also had, a lot of community service opportunity through my church. And I, to this day, I think I definitely still have like a faith, but I don't know if I have faith in the church, if I'm being honest, because of the way in which I was treated as I grew up. But that's the thing that I don't think people realize, is that actually a lot of like queer kids have faith needs.
Yeah.
And like they find a lot of solace in their communities, and what they need is love, not rejection. And I'm actually really happy that a lot more faith institutions are like stepping up and like really supporting these young people, but it's also just like so complicated. And it's not black and white, like it's not nuanced. Like I knew that the church that I loved was harming people like me, right? But I also had a shield. I didn't let anyone know who I was, right? So it's just so complex.
I grew up in a church that was, I think, rather than just conservative, fundamental would be a better word for it.
Yeah, fundamental.
And
thank you. Yeah.
yes, we were
Way
very
better word.
fundamentalist.
Yeah.
I might even use the cult word occasionally when I describe the way that I grew up. I try not to talk about it too much because I still have family members who
Right.
get really upset when they hear me call it that, right? Because they still believe in a lot of that. But the
Right.
truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, we are physical beings. We also are spiritual beings. There's a spiritual need there. And I think it's really important for us to realize that and come at it from a place of love. Because I know that when I reread that whole book after I left the fundamentalist group that I grew up in years later, I went, this book talks a lot about love. And we didn't hear that a lot in the group that I grew up with. We just didn't. I mean, yeah, the word was thrown in here and there, but it was really rarely ever a fundamental core concept. And as I have gone through my life, I have spent probably the last 20 something years trying to figure that out. You know, I stepped away from that group and had some atheistic tendencies for a moment and then realized, no, that takes too much faith to be an actual atheist. And I don't think I can abide with that. And I went really agnostic for a long time. And then I became what you would call really just a searcher or a seeker and trying to figure this stuff out. And at the end of the day, and this may be a controversial topic for a lot of people, but I think religion has done more to damage most people's view of God than anyone else on the face of the earth has. I think, learning that, finding that spirituality in your life is important. It's really important for most of us. Mm-hmm. And it's something that maybe you can't do in a faith community that you've been involved with or one that you find, but there is a way to find a group of people that you can work through that with and learn about. And I'm not one who's here to tell you that anything other than, your standard your standard sexual thoughts are 100%. It has to be exactly this for it to be okay.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, that's not my job. That's not my job. And if we want to start being very fundamentalist and talking about why everyone is going to hell, we're going to have to talk about the lifestyle that most of America lives around alcohol, right? Because alcohol is one of those things that I look at and go, wait, there's way more about not being a drunkard that's talked about in all those pages. And we have a society that is very alcohol-centric. And so let's just, instead of focusing on what the other person is doing wrong, how about we just connect with other humans and love and support them? And that's been one of the core tenets of Amanda and I's life as we especially learned about this journey of trying to help kids in foster care. There are so many things that they're dealing with already. I don't need to find another way to separate us.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, one of the things that I think about when I was, struggling with this idea of like, why is the church coming at people who are, in the LGBTQ plus community, it is like in the doctrine that I, grew up in, there was a lot of emphasis on the treatment of how we treat the poor. Right. And it, infuriated me that we had so many hypocritical tendencies in the way that we treated, people in poverty, versus, and we wouldn't confront that, but we scapegoated queer kids. Like that to me just didn't feel authentic. And if I'm being completely honest, like one of the reasons why I to this day consider myself like a servant or working in a human serving profession is because I really do believe that ties me to my faith. I really do feel in a lot of ways like that is living up to what I've been called to do and living up to a kind of spirituality that I feel drawn to. So not from like a weird savior perspective either. I don't I don't feel like I'm out here saving people, but like I just feel like I'm in a lot of ways called to serve, and that means everyone. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. I found that there's two calls that I'm not allowed to ignore. One of
Yeah.
them is when my wife calls me.
Yeah.
Anybody out there who has a wife can probably understand that, right? Your wife
Yeah.
calls, you answer that call. The other
Yeah.
one is if you have a calling that's been placed on your life from God. Those are the two I really do my best to never ignore those two, because they will come back to roost if I do.
Yeah.
And that's part of what we do, right? I have this calling on my life. My wife and I do. Amanda and I, we have a calling to kids from hard places.
Yep.
And I'm going to be real honest. A lot of it comes from Amanda's own upbringing, because it was very difficult for her. And this is something she's felt called to her entire life. And so, as I joined her in some of her own calling, I started to realize, hey, there's this stuff here that I'm pretty passionate about too. And so, it sounds like you have found that calling. And most people I know, most people do not understand why they're on this earth, why they're here. What's the whole point of their life? Because at the end of the day, you have a couple kids, you make some money, you buy some stuff.
Yeah.
Kids grow up and they leave you. They have kids of their own. You love on the grandkids. And in the middle of all that, there's like beer and football and Amazon stuff, right?
Yeah.
Full disclosure, the Amazon driver delivered 2 packages today. I'm just as guilty. but that's like the purpose of their life for most of the people I know. There's not a lot of people who know why they're on this earth and how the world will be different because they lived. 100 years from now, what changes have you made in this world? And my gosh, from what you told us at the beginning, it sounds like you've got a list of things that are going to be different. You're dealing with like national politics and stuff, right? That's friggin' huge.
Yeah, I mean that experience was so great because it taught me that I never wanted to work or live in DC. It taught me actually where my calling was, and it was not in DC. And for me, I had spent my final year in grad school really devoting to the academic side of what kinship actually means. I did a lot of studying TANF, studying different state TANF policies, and really looking at the gaps in kinship care. And so I then submitted that kind of proposal to the foster youth internship. And that's through the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute. And that's, being in the foster care world, that's like the best of the best and the brightest of the brightest who have lived experience going and really advocating and being in DC. And that was a life-changing experience for so many reasons. And just to be able to go and serve my community, but also work with a really rad senator. Senator Murray is wonderful, and be in a really welcoming office that really cared about what I had to say. That meant the absolute world. But also it allowed me to really solidify and realize kind of the life that I wanted. And, in DC for me, I could have seen myself working 12, 14 hours a day. Right. And at the end of the day, I just kind of realized that one, I needed to be connected to young people. I was not as connected to young people as I wanted to be. And two, I have a lot of other goals that I want to achieve outside of the work that I do. And I just didn't see myself being able to do that in DC. And I have a partner who is now my husband at the time. And we had been having a lot of conversation about what would it look like to move to DC? What kind of, and at the end of the day, we both just sat there and we were like, I don't know. And he came to visit and we were touring and we were just like, oh man, it's so humid here. So we were like, I don't know. And so we, and ultimately I was really blessed because when I graduated from grad school and ended my internship that summer, I ended up being able to get a job here in Washington State, serving the state from a statewide perspective. So, and I was really grateful because I love the Pacific Northwest. I love hiking. I'm very stereotypical Pacific Northwest person. I wear the socks with the Birkenstocks. That's my life, I love it here. So I never really wanted to leave. And I'm really grateful that I've now been able to, get married. I have a home, I have 2 cats, and I have a dog, and I also get to do what I love in my work. So I really had to prioritize the whole perspective for me, not just my career ambitions.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, Mom, if you're listening, I'm going to go ahead and apologize because there's a couple things my mom taught me. Number one, you never get into a woman's purse. And number 2, you never ask a woman her age. But I'm going to break that second rule at least. You seem fairly young to have had this much lived experience. So how old are you?
I'm actually 27.
Okay.
Yeah, 27.
Yeah. I mean, let's be honest. By the time I was 27, I had not made that many differences in the world. I know this already. Actually, we hadn't even really talked about foster care at that point in our life. We were still raising some young kids. We started at a very early age. I am 43 years old. 40, I think I just turned 40. Yeah, 44. Sorry, I lied. And my oldest son he is 23.
Oh, wow.
And so yeah. We started fairly young. Our oldest daughter would have been 25 this year. So yeah, and she's not our biological daughter, but we raised her. She called me dad. Yeah. Close enough.
Yeah.
But so yeah, having had that much lived experience in life, I think is really sets you up for the ability to walk out and make a huge difference in the world. And we talk about in a lot of the groups and circles that I run in about legacy and that sort of thing and what you're going to leave behind. And the truth is that we're all going to leave a legacy, right? Mm-hmm. You don't have a choice. You're going to leave a legacy. The only thing you have a choice in is what that legacy looks like.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like you have a lot of lived experience that could really lead to some huge changes for a lot of people over the next however many years you have left to chase this. And you have a passion that's really obvious for helping kids, and especially hearing teens and making life changes for them. And that's just amazing. What's your next steps look like? Are you getting ready to run for governor or?
Everyone keeps asking me if I'm going to run for politics. No, I'm not. Partly because I think I don't know if I can handle the public criticism. If I'm being honest, I'm like a perfectionist, and I'm trying really hard to shed that, right? But I don't think I could run for politics. I think the most I would ever do is a school board thing, just because maybe my kids are involved and I want to be involved. But I like to think of myself as more like a person behind the scenes. I really look at myself as a servant leader. So what am I doing in service to other people to help the collective mission? And I really think about myself. I don't really think about myself as someone who leaves a legacy, because the way that I want to go about this work is in community and in collaboration. And so if my name's on something, there better at least be 4 other names in there too, right? Because I don't think that this work gets accomplished if just one person is bought in, right? I just don't think it is. And so, for me, that really is, I guess, the next step is how do I really build that community, and how do I really build that buy-in, and how do I really build that coalition? And I think it starts with, meeting people and getting to know them a little bit deeper, and getting to know their passions, and really thinking about ways in which they can be bought into the work. I know that I bought a lot of my friends into this work because of who I am as a person. One of my best friends, she works as an occupational therapist in incarceration and rehabilitation. And a lot of that has stemmed from very intensive conversations that we've had about, criminal justice system, and how she herself, as someone who grew up, with no context of that, can actually impact that system based on the skill set and the passion she has. So, shepherding a lot of people, I think is one of my life's ambition. But if I'm being honest with you, I actually just stepped away. I just gave my 2 weeks notice at my current position because I'm actually going to take some time for myself. I think this pandemic has been a lot. Actually, like I said before, I lost my adoptive mom about a year ago in December of 2020. And so that was extraordinarily difficult. And I just need some time to reset, recalibrate, and I want to spend more time hiking. I want to spend more time with my dog. I want to spend more time to myself. My husband and I want to start having kids in the next few years, and I know that time for myself is going to disappear real quick. So I just kind of want to enjoy that a little bit more before I have to, really, I guess, step into a responsibility that I can't step away from, right? And so I'm allowing myself some rest for the next month or so, and then from there I'll figure out something else that I'm going to do. But like you said, I've done everything, so I hope to really still stay in policy and in systems change, because I really do love that work. I think I just need some time to breathe.
Yeah, that's something that I think we all need to really take that time to just breathe. Walking hopefully on the backside of a pandemic and seeing some of the generational trauma, we'll call it, that has occurred because of something that everyone has been exposed to. I have one of my youngest boy in the house, right? Like his first year of kindergarten involved a screen and a teacher who he didn't actually lay eyes on, and trying to figure out what that meant. Now, mind you, he doesn't have a diagnosis yet, but if they ever get around to putting a diagnosis on him, it's ADHD. This boy is, he is a ton of fun, but a ton is a lot of fun. I'm just going to say it's a lot. And he's a kid who's going to struggle with that side of it. And he's never known a world without some level of pandemic struggles, because he, at his age now, he's not going to remember the years before that. His entire existence is going to be painted by this. And we forget that. We forget that in the kids that we're working with and the kids that we're helping. We forget that in our own lives, my own kids I've tried to sit back, and I'm pretty certain even my older kids have never known a world where there wasn't a boogeyman attempting to kill Americans, right? Like they remember 9/11 as a formative event in their very early childhood. And some of these global traumas or national traumas are things that we've all experienced and all are going to have some level of responsibility to deal with as we get older. And we can help them through that as best we can. But really we're depending a little bit of extra weight on you here. We're depending on people like you who are working in that policy world to realize that and help others see that as a real struggle that we all need to face. Because quite frankly, we can choose to close our eyes and not deal with these traumas and these struggles today, and it's going to come home to roost, right?
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that I constantly am grateful for is the fact that, the Washington State Legislature really does care about young people in care. And so when the pandemic hit, they were like, oh gosh, what can we do? Right. And so people really jumped into action. I think a lot of young people were really vulnerable, but I think a lot of the potential harm and repercussions of what could have happened, could have been 5 million times worse if the state did nothing to respond. So, I'm really grateful that people saw the urgency and actually got to it. And it's actually really interesting too, because what we ended up doing with the pandemic is we ended up removing a lot of accessibility barriers, which I'm like, see, you guys can get out of your own way. You just haven't been. So I really hope that, we collectively realize that, we actually can be a little bit more human-centered in the way that we design this. And that, bureaucracy, although people point to that as an excuse to not do anything, it's actually just human-made. So we actually can redesign, and we actually can rethink it, and we actually can impact young people in a more positive way. Obviously, we have so many things that we have to, continue to work on. And I think, one of the things that I was particularly let in on was, the mental health of LGBTQ plus young people. Like if you're in the house in an unaffirming house, like that's so hard. And so, a lot of the local regional and in Washington State, we kind of have this dichotomy happening where Western Washington is a little bit more resourced than Eastern Washington is. And so a lot of resources on the West side, they really opened up their like online platforms to invite people from across the state. So it was really beautiful to see how, community came to the aid of others who didn't have access to things when the world, decided to implode. And so I'm really grateful for the response that this state has had. And the other thing I would say too is that I think in order for me to really be able to continue this work, self-care is just so important. I know that that's just a word that I think people like throw around, but like there's so much pressure. At least I feel so much pressure to like do things quote unquote the right way and to like be professional and not have my trauma show up in the workplace the way, even though we're talking about things that are like really deeply personal to me, that pressure just builds. And I think when it's coupled with not feeling like I can do the things that I want to do outside my house, or feeling like I have the potential to be really sick or get my family really sick, and then also coupled with grief, I just know now, thankfully, that I'm older and I have a little bit more retrospect, that if I kept going the way that I was going to burn out. And we can't have people who are passionate about this field burn out. We really can't. We can't afford that because the young people can't afford that. So I've sat with a lot of like, is it selfish for me to take time off, right? But also like, I'm not a martyr. Right? Like I'm not a martyr. I'm a human, and it's okay to like, to pause and to relax and to be okay living good for a minute and then going back into the fray, because refreshed me is going to have so much more of an impact than numb me.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal a picture from someone. I can't remember whose it is, but it's the idea of you can't fill someone's cup when your cup is empty. You want to be able to fill their cup from the excess that comes off of yours. And that's our responsibility, to fill our own cup, to do the things that help us be ready and willing and able to help others. And so, I know for me, I start my regular paying job at 4:00 in the morning, which is stupid early. Nobody likes that time. And quite frankly, I am not one of the early guys. We've got guys who start earlier than that by choice, and I think they're crazy. But I still get up, and I only live 10 minutes from work, maybe.
Yeah.
I still get up at 2:00 in the morning, because in that time frame, that allows me some room to come out here into this office. And I have a house full of kids. It's noisy. We have, we have lots and lots of psychological disorders, if you want to call them that, from the DSM listed in my house. And so I don't have a lot of calm, peaceful time. So at 2:00 in the morning, I can come out here into my little office and sit down here at my little desk, and I can sit here with some silence, some prayer or meditation. I can read. I can spend some time, doing all those things. And those are the things that make a difference for me. And I know that because when I don't do it, when I put it aside for a while, my wife says to me, "You haven't been doing your morning routine, have you?" She can tell. Like I know it makes a difference. And so what does that look like for you, just to fill your own cup in a way that allows you to show up for others?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I think I've had to really think about that. I do not wake up early. I'm one of those people who wakes up at 8:30 and then rolls into the 9:00 meeting. I love to sleep. That's like one of my favorite things. I think a good night's sleep is like one of my favorite ways to recover. I spend a lot of time with my animals. And so I really tried hard to intentionally take a 10-minute break from work where I'm just playing with my dog or I'm snuggling with my cat, because that really like recenters me. I'm a kinesthetic kind of person. And I actually think I have ADHD, but I'm working with a doctor right now around that. And I can't stay still at a desk for prolonged periods of time. Like working from home has actually been very difficult for me in a lot of ways. But I've had to figure out how to like cope with that. And so I will, get up play with my animals. I drink water. I have to remember to drink water. I have to remember to eat food. And then at the end of the day, I, put it away, turn off my phone notifications, and I go and I have a conversation with my husband. Like, we're just like, how was your day? What is something you're doing? What are you reading right now? Like, tell me more about this. He's actually in the process of writing a novel, which I think is so cool because I am not eloquent when it comes to writing. And so we'll usually talk about that, or we'll go on a walk together. And then on the weekends, for me, it's really about spending time with friends. I think right now that's a little bit more limited. So my bubble's a little bit closed. And so, I have a best friend I go on walks with. I go hiking with my dog. And then I also am a Lindy Hopper. Are you familiar with Lindy Hop?
I don't think so.
Okay, so it's an African-American vernacular jazz dance that was born in Harlem in like the 1930s. And it's a partner dance, and it's like done to like jazz music, like Duke Ellington and Cab Calloway and all these other really amazing jazz musicians from that time era. And it's a very high energy, like very rhythmic dance. And I just feel so good every time I do it. So I do that. and it releases so much because it's twofold. It's a community thing where I get to see people that I know, right? And of course, it's a vax and mask thing here in Washington State. And as of right now, it's a vax, mask, and boosted thing in Washington State to get access to the venue. But I go and I get to see people, I get to dance with people. So I get that physical activity, but I also get that social piece. And so for me, that's also really regenerative. And I usually do that like 2 or 3 times a week to like restore myself from a physical standpoint, because the trauma manifests in the body. Like, I know that that's been like a thing that has like recently come out, but for me, like that's real. I need to like exercise it out.
Yeah. My methodology makes me sound lazy, mostly because I am. One of those little things that most folks don't know about me is, technically speaking, I am a disabled veteran. And what that really boils down to is I tore some stuff up in my back a lot of years ago. So the physical stuff is really challenging for me.
Yeah.
I'm not the guy to go outside and play football with because, nope. There's a part of my body that's going to say, absolutely not, you fool. Now lay on the ground. That was dumb. I mentioned, being well-adjusted earlier today. Somebody, I don't know, was that earlier, but somebody mentioned that well-adjusted piece to me. Well-adjusted for me only means I just walked out of the chiropractor's office, right?
Yeah.
And that's my story. But for me, it's not the physical side. For me, it really is the mental side. And I need to be able to calm myself and get my head in a place where I can have that conversation with folks. I can be that person in a good, healthy space. And so I've took me a lot of years, but I finally realized that, and that's what it does for me. And it sounds like you have done the work to figure out what it is that does that for you as well. And I can only hope more people will listen, more of these listeners will hear out there, and they will go, oh yeah, what is it that makes me feel good? What is it that resets my mind and my body and makes me ready and able to serve others? Because you're a great example of someone who not only has that awareness, but is willing to serve others. And I love that about your story, that you're changing the world based on those simple things that, let's be honest, they've known about this for like 2,000 years or more. Just talk to the Buddhists, talk to the people in the ancient writings, and they told us to do this stuff. And for a couple thousand years, a lot of us have just not been listening very well.
Yeah. And I think that's like one of my beefs with like the self-care movement, is that it feels like really like westernized and like whitewashed, when like you're absolutely correct. Like a lot of the things that people have been doing for like thousands of years, it's just been like part of their practice. And we just are now catching on like in Western society, I guess. And so for me, I try really hard, like not to co-opt that, but like, it is really, again, about like, what makes me feel good. And the last thing I forgot too, is that I love to garden. I didn't realize I loved a garden, but I love it. I love the idea of growing my own food. Because, part of poverty trauma is like there were days where it's like, what are we eating? And people will ask me like, what is it like to be poor? And I was like, well, have you ever had powdered milk? Like, that's
I
usually
know
my response.
powdered milk.
No powdered milk. Yep, no poverty. Have you ever had Tang? Yeah, that's what it is. And so, for me, there's something really healing about being able to grow my own food. And then also, one of my personal goals is to be able to, my husband and I, we bought a house right recently in the last like year or two. And that is a big, big stabilizing thing. I never thought I would own a home. But we are able to garden now because we have land, right? And so I want to be able to build more boxes to be able to donate to food banks and stuff, because I think, one, I realized like with the 2 boxes I have, we can't eat all the stuff I produce because I'm going crazy over here. But 2, I just think it's important to give back too, because if this is something that's really healing for me, I can only hope that it's going to be healing for another person.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, my 8-year-old came to me this morning and said, Dad, I want to have chickens so we can get eggs. And we've done that in the past where we lived before. We're in town now. I mean, I mentioned we're in rural Missouri, but we're in city limits now. And I don't know what the rules are. I'm pretty certain we could find our ways around whatever it is to have a couple hens. But we used to do that because I grew up poor. My wife grew up poor.
Yeah.
We grew up in that life. And we actually, for a long time, we were living in a very rural setting, and we had goats, milk goats, and we had chickens and ducks for eggs. And my kids loved it at that time. And it's one of those things where you get to put your hands on food where it comes from. We had a huge garden. I think it was probably 20 feet wide by about 40 feet deep. We had all the room to, and I got into where every weekend when I was off, I would just make bread for the week because we couldn't make all of our own stuff. And it was just so amazing. And we forget sometimes it's all those simple things that, and I don't care where it comes from. I'll co-opt it if it works. I will bring it into my life if it works. And it's been great for that. And right now we have a German Shepherd in our backyard. So if we're going to have chickens, we're going to have to figure out how to not have meals for the German Shepherd.
Yes. I have a very enthusiastic boxer who would be like, is this my toy?
Yes. Yeah, I grew up with boxers. Yeah. Yes, I know them. Look, it's a toy and it's a meal too, right? Yeah. But those are the things that I think can really serve kids to be able to see what that is, put their hands on it, and do some things that are very, very grounding. Amanda had to step away because we have a screaming baby, and she's not a happy baby right now for some reason, and she's trying to find the happy place. But we've had a lot of struggles with anxiety and things like that in our family, and some of that comes from her background for her and our kids as well. I've had young kids have panic attacks, and we've had to work our way through it. And one of the super powerful skill sets we found is learning to do some grounding exercise, some things that help ground you to this earth, this life, and get back into the moment. And I can see where, what you're saying, being able to go out and get in the garden and pull the weeds and plant the plants and spend some time pruning this and harvesting your own foods, where that would be a very grounding thing for you to really help you become somebody who's not focused on the struggles in your life, but rather to have something that's literally growing right in front of you.
Yeah. And in all honesty, that really took time. I don't think I was really able to do that until this last year or so. So I like to think about it before I was 25, I was just a little bit all over the place, constantly living in anxiety. And I think, with the financial access that I've gained now that I have, I'm a full-time, I work full-time, I have, a home, I have a partner who's also financially working as well. There's a lot of relief that I think I'm now starting to experience. Whereas I was in survival mode because I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have anything to fall back on. So I was constantly grinding. And so, for me, I have to acknowledge too, that part of this relief comes with access that I think a lot of young people don't necessarily have in their life, in their life necessarily at the time that they really need it. So, I mean, thinking about ways that we can actually like provide that relief for young people, I think is so important. And for me, like, I really think about it as like, how can we provide financial relief for young people? Because that was just like such a huge stressor, trying to go through college and then go through grad school and live and eat and, pay my bills that I had because I was now an adult. Now that I'm older and I have a little bit more access, like the relief can come, but it's so sad to me that I'm now starting to experience relief at the age of 27, right? When it could have been earlier, or like my peers, not a care in the world. Like some of the people I lived in college with, like they didn't have to work full time because they had parents who were paying their rent. That wasn't for me. Like I had to work all the time. So, just having a lot of gratitude for being here in this moment, but also thinking a lot about like where I've been, and realizing that that's not fun either. So.
Yeah. Well, Lily, I really appreciate you telling your story today because there are so many people who don't understand this. And like I mentioned before, your perspective comes from so many places, right? Like you have this lived experience that allows you to be able to really understand all the different parts and pieces of this struggle that everyone doesn't necessarily have the ability to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank you for giving us your time today and sharing your story and helping to inspire somebody else out there, because as much as I may be a little bit of a political skeptic, I might actually kind of look down on the way that a lot of the politics are run these days. It's not terribly helpful to have your mind in that spot all the time. I know, because I do it. And, but to see somebody like you out there who has lived experience, who probably has had some of the same reservations about politicians' ability to help us, but you're making the difference. You're making certain that view is heard, and you're changing the world.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think, it's definitely difficult, but I think one of the things that I've realized at the end of the day is like a lot of these people are really human and they actually do care. They just don't know. Like, that's why I think, it's important to share the reality. I don't think about like sharing our story in a way that is uncomfortable or not on the terms of like the young person sharing it. But I think it's important for people who represent us to understand the diverse reality that their constituents are going through. And that absolutely includes young people in foster care. And so if we can get real about that, if we can build empathy with that, I think we can actually really change stuff for young people. So that's why I do what I do.
Well, I want to thank you. I just for doing it and then helping to inspire the next generation to follow in your footsteps.
Mm-hmm. It is my absolute pleasure to serve.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Lily's story. Now take her knowledge and wisdom to heart so you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have new episodes every Tuesday. If you'd like to share your story as a guest, you can reach us at jason@fostercarenation.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. And don't forget, we have a Patreon account where you can support our mission for as little as $5 a month. It's at patreon.com/fostercarenation. The links to everything are in the show notes on your podcast player or at fostercarenation.com. And as always,
you are so super awesome. I think you guys are cool. Yeah. Thank you for listening. Thanks.
Unparalleled Studios.